Welcome everyone, it's Michael DeHaan from Care to Grow. And a part of the Women's Empowerment series, I've got Natasha Janssens with me. How are you, Natasha?
I'm well, thank you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
No, pleasure. Just a brief about Natasha. So I think I met you first about 3 years ago. I'm looking to do maybe some work together, and at the time wasn't right, or how we could sort of collaborate together. And then we did the same course about 2 years ago, the Money Mindset course. Got our accreditations in that. It was great to see you again, because I've always wondered, I was really inspired by how you look after your clients. You're very much, as I said, about the clients, their journey, and I suppose supporting them live their best life. I'm going, how do I connect with this woman? And then again, you came back and did the course there, which is fantastic. So, and hence we're here today talking about women's empowerment. So thank you for that.
No, my pleasure. It's always great to connect with other like-minded professionals and sort of keep sharing ideas and stories and learning from each other.
Yeah. So just a little bit of a brief. So Natasha runs a business, and you have for almost 8 years, Sova Financial. And that's accounting, financial planning, mortgage broking. So it covers a whole suite. And I'm assuming now you've obviously morphed that money coaching side, which is just so important around behaviour and mindset around money across all those services, I'd imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been a bit of an evolution with how my business has grown over time, which I'm sure we'll chat more about. But yeah, we've sort of have Sova Financial sitting there as your more traditional finance practice, where we do holistic advice and work one-on-one with clients from that point of view. And then there's Women with Sense, which is more of an online-based platform and less of a done for you and more of a done with you type of service, where we're starting to look at ways that, first of all, we can bridge that gap in financial advice, and how do we make financial planning more affordable and more accessible to everyone, but also then how we support our clients, women especially, to have more of a voice in that space and more ownership over what it is that they're doing, rather than just sort of following a plan that someone else might have laid out for them.
Wow, and that's perfect, because again, this series is all about voice and visibility, so I appreciate that. So I thought before we get started, I'd just like to learn a bit more around Natasha, like something personal, or like the journey that you've taken in a personal sense.
Yeah, look, I've had quite a journey. There's every so often I think about whether I should write a book about it. Despite my accent, I'm not a born and raised Aussie. I came from the old Yugoslavia, and my dad worked as a low-level diplomat for the Yugoslav government. So I had a very different upbringing, and up until my teenage years, war and conflict was all that I knew. I was born in Uganda, grew up in Sri Lanka, and in between that, we'd sort of go back to Yugoslavia. So there was quite a lot of instability, obviously, and it taught me some valuable life lessons from a very, very early age. But when I was a teenager, we were very fortunate to get posted to Canberra, and I absolutely fell in love with Australia, with the culture, and not least of all the fact that it's safe. So I always vowed that I would come back. Now, the thing is that I lived under such circumstances that honestly, I had better odds at winning the lotto than coming to Australia. And my dad, in an effort to shield me from having my hopes and dreams crushed, would regularly say to me, put that thought out of your head. You're never going to get to Australia. We're not going back there. You have no way of migrating there. And literally, we have no family here. I had no connections, not that it really matters here, but I had no one to sponsor me. I hadn't finished uni. I had no skills based on which to apply to migrate. So it really was something, and we didn't have the finances to support that either. So it really was something that was completely out of reach. And being a bit of a stubborn kid, I said to my dad, well, you mark my words, the second I'm 18 on the first flight back to Australia. Now, as they say, careful what you wish for. Life had certain plans for me, and I ended up 3 weeks after my 18th birthday fleeing the Yugoslav border in the midst of a war, in the midst of bombs, getting separated from my parents, landed in Hungary, was stuck there for about 6 weeks, and lo and behold, 6 weeks later, I was on a plane to Canberra.
Wow.
and yes, landed here and literally sort of hit the ground running. And because I had to be self-sufficient and self-sustaining, I had to figure out where I was going to live and how I was going to afford to support myself and all the rest. And yeah, and the rest, as they say, is history. So there you go, a little bit about me that you might not have known.
What a great story. Wow. And that sort of determination and, in a sense, manifesting. So you're quite clear on what you wanted. So thank you for sharing that.
No, my pleasure. And that's the thing that most people realize, and there's a lot of confusion, I think, when we talk about manifesting. There's a lot of people there that I think, in a sense, abuse the words, so that people have started to really lose appreciation for what true manifesting is. But I try to explain to my clients that part of the thing for me coming here was that, because, as you say, I was so clear on what it was I wanted and I was so desperate to get here, it meant that I was on the lookout for even the slightest opportunity that might give me an inkling of getting there. And these are things that if I didn't have that focus, I would have gone and dismissed, and I probably wouldn't even have noticed them as opportunities. I would have just walked by. You know, I say to my clients, it's the same as when you're researching a car. Like, I bought a Golf last year, and prior to that point, I never realized how many white Golfs are on the road. And now that's all I spot. Like, I just see white Golfs because it's front of mind for me. And to me, that's the simplest way that I try and interpret manifestation, as far as, you know, having that clarity and visibility over what it is that you're after, because you'll start to notice those opportunities everywhere. And then it comes down to you as to whether or not you have the courage to take the steps and follow through with the opportunities that arise.
Wow. And because I think the same in regard to that manifestation, where there's little miracles that sort of shine out that you're on track. And a lot of us miss them. A lot of us.
And it's amazing. We dismiss the potential for opportunities. I mean, if I consider the way that I came here, absolutely, I had no connections. We had no money. It was absolutely impossible. But what's amazing is when you are so determined, and when people can sense that determination, like, the money came. Like, people were in on my vision as well, and they were going, okay, what's a way that we can help you, and this, that, and the other, and the money came. So it's that whole thing about, yes, you know, as you say, the miracles will happen. You just have to not let, you know, your fear that it might not happen, or, you know, disbelief perhaps that it will work out your way, sort of block you from going forward and trying and striving for it.
Wow, that's quite inspirational. Thank you for sharing that. So with your business, so Sova Financial, accounting, broking, financial planning, very much, I suppose, the male-dominated industries, and you've done extremely well in that, and also set up your Women with Sense in regard to that more online education and bringing people into your community. What are some of the hurdles, or, you know, that what you went through running the business in a very much male-dominated industry? Did they sort of look at you and go, well, like, who's Natasha? What's she trying to do? Or share some stories around, you know, how that might have played out.
Look, to be honest, I, for a large part of my life, was completely oblivious to this whole gender divide. I was very fortunate in that regard, because my dad, as a starting point, was very focused on getting me to look to the future as far as job security and what jobs would be in demand. So he actually pushed me to study software development, which in the, you know, mid-90s, there were hardly any women, I think, doing computer programming and software development. So from a very young age, I was used to just being surrounded by boys, by guys, by men, you know. And over that, my career sort of then expanded from that point, that I didn't really notice that I was surrounded by all this male energy. Now, the benefit to me, I think, and why in some cases I think I have more confidence than many other women, for example, is because I was surrounded by men. I had a lot of great male mentors and teachers, and I was working closely with business owners who, again, were often men. So I was learning from their point of view how they think, which is a very different, I think, approach often to perhaps what my mother would be advise me, who would be teaching me to be more cautious, more careful, more, you know, try not to do that, you know, whereas, you know, boys are sort of taught from a young age, you know, they got to be the carer and the provider from the strength point of view. So, you know, go forth and conquer. You know, you guys are the guys that, you know, you have to go and fight the wars, you know, you're braced for that. So it's, you know, possibly less scary than to go and run a business. So for me, I always had great support. I don't feel that at any point anyone discouraged me or made me feel like there was anything that I couldn't do. And I think as well, that's where sometimes our own fear and perception, because I know for women, yeah, it's intimidating when we walk into a room and it's just men. But a lot of that is what's in our heads, because we're imagining ourselves as being weaker or less than, and we're putting other people on a pedestal. And then we're going into this space, we've created this story about what's going on that isn't necessarily tied to the truth. Whereas in my experience, once you go in there, like, you're treated very much as an equal. No one is talking down to you. No one is saying, hey, you're a chick, what do you think you can go and do here? And if anything, everyone was really keen to collaborate and have a different point of view and all of that. So, for any women who are listening, I really encourage you to don't let the fear of stepping into something that is male dominated or going up and talking to a group of men or whatever, don't let that scare or intimidate you, because a lot of that fear is just something that we've imagined in our own minds about where we sit in society and how that conversation will go. But in my experience, it's been a completely different result.
Wow. And thanks again for sharing that, because I do believe people, women in particular, will go into a room and feel that sort of subservient, or don't speak up about, communicating their voice and visibility. So I think that's just great advice on your mindset when you're walking into that room, and how you're going to hold yourself and just start the conversations and see how it flows.
Yeah, which can be challenging because, often as women, we have been taught to, be quiet. And if we look historically, it's women were there to be seen and not heard. So there's a lot of that that's been passed on through the generations. Again, I was very fortunate that I came from, my mum, had two sisters. So it was a strong family of women, very strong, very stubborn. And my grandmother, even, back in her days when she was supposed to have an arranged marriage, she pushed back on that and said, I'm not going to marry him until we've lived together for a year and I get to know who this guy is. Oh. So, already in those times, we're talking like the 1920s, she was like, well, you know what? So she was already leading the charge from that point of view. So I was very lucky that I had that, that sort of strength and upbringing. Whereas for some women, we are being taught to be quieter, to be more subdued, to be gentler, and even now as a businesswoman and, I've got two young kids. I worked through maternity leave. I took my babies with me to meetings and talks and all that. And, you have to have that sort of stubbornness and determination to sort of go and do that and to ignore what's being said. Because, there are people there that will judge and say, well, what kind of a mother are you going and bringing your child to work and not taking that time to be with them? Yeah. Because we've had that conditioning as to what a mother looks like and what her role is and what a woman's role is, as opposed to something completely different that's acceptable for men. So recognizing that that's where some of our stories come from, but then saying, okay, but that's something that's not necessarily applicable today. That's someone else's story. It doesn't have to be my story. I can choose to build a different reality for myself and then just go forth and do that.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. And there'll be young women sort of looking at this and going, I can take something from that. And again, just start within my inner self, just going, what's important to me, and start living out that life. So
exactly. Listen to the voices that are propping you up and just tell the rest to shush.
So the Women with Sense that you set up there, and I believe it's won some awards, and it's very much empowering women around financial independence. So when did you start that, and what was the sort of purpose on that?
Yeah, so look, when I started my business, I was all about wanting to help young people and young families better manage their money and get into home ownership and live that Australian dream. And as I said earlier, I was very oblivious to the challenges that women in particular face, because I was always, I guess I had a very different situation with the way I came to Australia and then how I then grew up from that point of view. Yeah. But it wasn't until, as Murphy's Laws would have it, just as I decided to start a business, I also got pregnant. But that, again, when you think about things happening for a reason, that completely changed the trajectory of my career and my business. So I started networking with my mother's groups. We started talking more about financial matters and all these topics. And that was when I realized that really, for starters, women are really hungry to learn more about money, to be more empowered and more in control. But certainly, I say back then, like it was ages ago, but how quickly things have changed. But certainly, even in 2014, there was a lack of resources and networking groups where women could go and talk about finances. And that's where the male-dominated part of things came into it, because you're talking about money in a mother's group. Well, very few people in that group are qualified in the space of finance. So you're sort of teaching each other based on rumors half the time.
Yeah.
And so that's when, I said with their input, I said, well, why don't we create a separate group that's for all women, and we can get together and we can talk about all this stuff and bring it out in the open. And it just sort of started to grow from there, and went from being once a month catch-ups at a local cafe with babies to women from all ages, walks and shapes of life coming through from all parts of Australia and joining in together to learn more about their experiences. So that's sort of how it came to be, very much driven by the clients and the users more so than a vision that I had per se.
Yeah. It's a great platform that you've got for women in particular to learn more about the financial side and build that confidence. So well done.
Thank you very much. Yeah. And I found that it's important as well for women to have that safe space. And the beauty with technology is it allows things like being able to ask questions anonymously. And it's amazing that when you hear a question, how many people then go, oh, I had that same question.
Yes.
And suddenly you don't feel like you're the one who's being silly. Again, it's that story that we have. I'm not good with money. I'll ask something stupid. What will people think of me? But having that anonymity and starting that conversation in a safe way has sort of empowered more women to realize, well, you know what, everyone else is in the same boat. Everyone else has the same questions. It's not just me that I'm viewing as being like this.
Yeah.
It's everyone is the same, and I'm not bad with numbers. I'm just a human being.
So I've just got one last question for you. So a young Natasha, 25, that's sort of watching this and in the corporate world or running a business, going to network groups, not really speaking up, not having that confidence. And I know a lot of your confidence came from your upbringing where you made some choices there and you're quite clear about what you're after. But someone's a bit shy and someone's a bit reserved and they've got a great product offering, service. They can change a lot in the corporate as an example. What sort of advice would you give them? What's the sort of a tip that you give them to be able to shine and come from within?
Look, it's a great question, and it will be tough if you're naturally shy and reserved, but it's, see where you can stretch yourself just slightly out of the comfort zone, but start asking those questions, start communicating what that vision is. Because the thing that makes you braver and the thing that, in my opinion, makes you succeed is the fact that each time you do something that scares you a little bit, you realize that it's actually not as bad as you imagine. And then it makes you braver to go and take that next step and the next step and the next step. And suddenly, I'm now that person. I'll sit in a room full of people and I will purposefully ask the stupid question because I know that everyone else is sitting there wanting to ask the same question and everyone is shy, and wondering how will they be seen if they ask the question. So I go, well, I'll go and do it because I learned, but if I go and ask it, no one is going to put me down. And if anything, it opens up more conversations and people come up to me and go, I had that same question. I'm so glad you asked it. It then turned into a really positive thing. Whereas we imagine, we'll be laughed out of the room kind of thing. Yeah. So I think the more you can start to do little by little, do something that scares you a little bit each day, you'll start to build those courage muscles because you'll realize it's not really as bad as what we think.
Wow, no, I think that's great advice because I think if people think they've got to change massively and then those little steps there and as I said, build that muscle and build that confidence slowly without putting you right outside your comfort zone, but just slowly and surely build that confidence. So I think that's a great tip. So I appreciate that.
No, my pleasure.
So I suppose that's the end of it. And ideally, you've got something out of this. I've really enjoyed the conversation with Natasha. I knew I would. It was great to sort of reconnect and see where you're at. You're doing a lot of great work. And thank you for being a part of the series and sharing your story and some of your wisdom.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Right, all the best.